In 2025, the world's longest undefended border became ground zero for a new bitter trade war between the United States and Canada. What started as a series of American tariffs quickly escalated into a multi-billion-dollar conflict, threatening decades of economic partnership and stability. The dispute, fueled by protectionist policies and political brinkmanship, now impacts everything from grocery prices in Toronto to factory jobs in Ohio. To understand how we reached this crisis, we need to look back at the first shots fired by the Trump administration earlier this year. The trade war erupted in March 2025, sending shockwaves across North America. What began as a simmering dispute over trade imbalances and protectionist rhetoric quickly escalated into a full-blown economic confrontation. The world watched as tensions between the United States and Canada, two of the world's closest trading partners, reached a boiling point. The Trump administration, determined to protect American industries and jobs, slapped a sweeping 25% tariff on a wide range of Canadian exports not protected by the USMCA. This move was both sudden and dramatic, catching many by surprise. Overnight, the cost of doing business across the border skyrocketed, and the rules of the game changed for thousands of companies. Canadian industries, especially automotive, steel, and aluminum, were hit hard, facing immediate price hikes and uncertainty. These sectors, already operating on thin margins, suddenly found themselves squeezed by higher costs and shrinking demand. Factory floors grew tense as managers and workers alike wondered what the future would hold. Some key exports like energy and potash faced a lower 10% tariff, a calculated move to avoid disrupting critical U.S. supply chains. The administration's strategy was clear: hit hard where it hurt, but keep the flow of essential resources steady. Even so, the uncertainty rippled through these sectors as companies worried about what might come next. Canadian businesses scrambled to respond. Should they absorb the costs, pass them to U.S. customers, or move production south? Boardrooms buzzed with urgent meetings, and supply chain managers raced to find alternatives. For many, the choices were stark: risk losing market share, cut jobs, or invest in costly new operations abroad. The tariffs sent shockwaves through Canada's economy, paralyzing investment and long-term planning. Projects were put on hold, expansion plans shelved, and uncertainty became the new normal. Communities dependent on manufacturing and exports braced for layoffs and closures, unsure how long the standoff would last. The message was clear: no sector was safe, and the U.S. was prepared to use its economic might to force concessions. The shockwaves extended beyond boardrooms and factories, reaching everyday Canadians and Americans who suddenly faced higher prices and job insecurity. The stage was set for a tense and unpredictable standoff between two close allies. As both governments dug in, the world wondered, would cooler heads prevail? Or was this just the beginning of a much larger conflict? President Trump justified the tariffs by citing national security and the alleged flow of fentanyl from Canada, despite data showing the vast majority comes from the southern border. Critics saw this as a pretext for economic nationalism, not genuine security concerns. Trump also targeted Canada's dairy policies, claiming they unfairly block U.S. products and hurt American farmers. His America First message resonated with supporters who felt left behind by globalization. By focusing on specific grievances, Trump painted Canada as a competitor exploiting American goodwill. The narrative of victimhood and reclaiming economic dominance became the core justification for the tariffs. The trade war was now about more than economics. It was about national pride and political power. Canada struck back with $22 billion in retaliatory tariffs, targeting iconic American products and key industries. The list included everything from orange juice and peanut butter to steel, vehicles, and bourbon, chosen to maximize political pain in the U.S. The goal: rally American businesses and consumers to pressure Washington to de-escalate. For Canadians, it meant higher prices and fewer choices, but for Ottawa, it was a necessary stand. The move was risky, risking further escalation from an unpredictable White House. Canada's message was clear: it would defend its interests, even at a cost. The world watched, waiting for Trump's next move. The trade war had become a high-stakes game of economic brinkmanship. Trump's response was swift and fiery. He threatened to raise tariffs on Canadian goods to 35% by August 1st. The threat sent Canadian industries into panic, as a 35% tariff would make many products uncompetitive in the U.S. The administration spared energy and potash, again protecting sensitive U.S. sectors. The looming deadline created a sense of crisis, pressuring Canada to make concessions. Markets roiled and Prime Minister Carney faced mounting pressure to find a solution. The conflict had escalated from a trade dispute to an economic crisis. Both nations now stood on the brink of a full-blown trade war. At the heart of the conflict is Canada's supply management system for dairy, which uses quotas and sky-high tariffs to protect its farmers. U.S. producers argue the system blocks their access, fueling economic hardship in states like Wisconsin and New York. Trump seized on dairy as a symbol of unfair trade, rallying his base and justifying broader tariffs. For Canada, supply management is a political cornerstone, fiercely defended by farmers and the government. The U.S. demands more access. Canada refuses to dismantle its system. The dairy impasse poisons negotiations on all other issues. Until a compromise is found, a lasting peace remains out of reach. Dairy has become the flashpoint for the entire trade war. As the tariff battle raged on between the United States and its trading partners, President Trump made a bold move that would reshape the landscape of North American trade. He signed into law the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill Act, a sweeping piece of legislation that aimed to overhaul the U.S. tax code and, in the process, dramatically alter the rules of international commerce. This act was more than just a tax reform, it was a statement of intent. The bill included provisions with far-reaching trade implications, sending shockwaves through the business community and across borders. One of its most controversial measures was the elimination of the de minimis threshold. Previously, small-value imports, like online orders from Canadian retailers, could enter the U.S. duty-free. Now, every package, no matter how small, was subject to U.S. duties and customs checks. For Canadian online retailers, this was a seismic shift. Suddenly they faced new administrative hurdles and costs, losing the price advantage that had helped them compete in the vast American market. Many small businesses worried about their future as cross-border sales became more complicated and expensive. But the act went even further. It raised taxes on payments to companies based in countries the U.S. deemed to have discriminatory trade practices, a move widely interpreted as a warning shot at Canada and other close allies. These measures didn't just escalate the trade conflict, they embedded protectionism deep into the fabric of U.S. law. The new rules made it much harder for negotiators to find common ground, as the conflict was no longer about temporary tariffs, but about permanent changes to the system. For Canada, the challenge had grown. It was no longer just about retaliating against tariffs or negotiating exemptions. Now, the very structure of U.S. trade policy had shifted, threatening long-standing economic ties and raising questions about the future of cross-border cooperation. The passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act signaled a deeper, more lasting shift toward economic nationalism in the United States. It was a clear message that the old rules no longer applied. With these sweeping changes, the path to resolution had become even more complicated, leaving both sides searching for a way forward in an increasingly uncertain trade environment. As the August 1st deadline drew ever closer, a palpable sense of anxiety gripped both nations. The air was thick with uncertainty, and every news update seemed to heighten the tension. In cities and small towns alike, people gathered around televisions and outdoor screens searching for any sign of hope or breakthrough. The stakes were enormous, and the consequences of failure weighed heavily on everyone's minds. Prime Minister Carney, resolute and determined, promised to use every remaining moment to seek a deal that would protect Canadian interests. Yet, the path forward was shrouded in uncertainty. Each step was fraught with political risk, and every word was scrutinized by both allies and opponents. The government faced mounting pressure from business leaders, workers, and families who feared what might come next. If the threatened 35% tariffs were imposed, the impact would be immediate and severe. Canadian goods, once staples in American stores, would suddenly become unaffordable luxuries. Meanwhile, American products, already more expensive in Canada, would become even harder to find. The flow of goods that had long defined the border was grinding to a halt, and shelves in markets on both sides began to empty. Small businesses, the backbone of countless communities, faced existential threats. Shop owners watched helplessly as customers dwindled and supply chains broke down. For many years of hard work and dreams of prosperity now hung in the balance, threatened by forces far beyond their control. Behind closed doors, negotiators worked around the clock, desperately searching for a face-saving compromise. Ideas were floated, perhaps a token concession on dairy or a new pledge on border security. Every proposal was met with skepticism, but the urgency to find common ground was undeniable. The fate of millions depended on their ability to bridge the divide. The gap between President Trump's sweeping demands and Canada's unyielding red line seemed almost impossible to bridge. National pride and political survival were at stake, and neither side wanted to appear weak. The rhetoric grew sharper, and the risk of a total breakdown in talks loomed ever larger. The outcome was shrouded in uncertainty. Would this be a temporary crisis, resolved at the last minute, or the beginning of a new era of rivalry and division between two close neighbors? The answer was far from clear, and the world could only watch and wait. As international media descended and crowds gathered in anxious anticipation, the world held its breath. Everyone hoped for peace, but braced for the possibility of a costly, damaging conflict that could reshape the future of North America for years to come.